The Monster Hunter Wilds beta was a huge success, with having over 463,000 players logging into it. Speedrunning seems to be ingrained into the Monster Hunter community at this point, so to no surprise, players went into the beta with one thing in mind: defeating Rey Dau as quickly as possible. The GameWith website, shown here, has remained vigilant in keeping up with the accurate times for these speedruns. During the beta, these numbers changed constantly, and eventually they added brackets for the different types of speedrun, the no rock fall and including falling rocks. This new addition changed the speed rankings a lot, but it was a little less popular. People were just either ignorant to the change or wasn't a fan of the idea of using the environment. Charged Blade, Longsword, Hunting Horn, and Dual Swords did not have any applications for this bracket, so the no rockfall versions were placed instead. But rockfall damage was not something to sleep on. One weapon in particular went from one of the bottom 5 to second best. Other weapons usually saw a 1 to 2 minute improvement, while bow saw a 12-second difference. We're going to go over the no rockfall category with an honorable mention to that one weapons run I talked about earlier, but there's a few things to discuss before we do so. First, for speedruns, players will utilize traps. Trapping is faster than killing a monster. You can trap a monster and end the hunt usually when they reach 20%, 15%, or 10% remaining health points, depending on the monster, with elder dragons being the exception. Some of these runs include palicos and some do not. The bow and the longsword speedrun specifically run without a palico, most likely because of their power gain from dodging and countering. When a bow user does a perfect dodge, their stamina gets replenished and this little meter goes up. The longsword gets more opportunities to counter, which means more damage as well as a faster red spirit gauge. The other discrepancy in these runs is the use of demon ammo. With the ability to switch weapons on your mount, most users started with heavy bowgun to fire demon ammo. Demon ammo is an attack buff that sits on the ground, allowing for you and your party to benefit from it. For worlds, this buff usually stacked with everything else. I'm not sure why players chose not to use the demon ammo, whether it be personal choice or lack of information. Regardless, it wasn't the make or break for some of these runs because, surprisingly, the number 1 spot did not use demon ammo. The weapon in 14th place is the Lance by Dina. But shockingly, this run is packed with amazing gameplay. Lance gameplay is more on the slower side, but that doesn't stop Dina from doing this. A full 180 with the help of focus mode steering. This run was definitely one of the more exciting runs with how perfectly it was executed. With amazing blocks and just continuously pummeling Rey's face, Dina resharpens their lance not once or twice, but 5 different times in this run. Dina also went with an interesting trap method of setting bombs up as soon as the trap was laid. Rey Dau wasn't trappable yet, but Dina was hoping the bombs would help push the monster over the threshold. And it does, giving us an explosive end to the run at 650, while charging into the distance as celebration. Which X comes in at the 13th spot by 10 Mu. It's really hard not to enjoy a good speed run when it starts out with an offset attack. 10 does an excellent job of weaving between axe and sword, making sure they unload all of their damage during knockdown states. They also make sure no counter or wound goes unnoticed. We should also talk about thorn bushes. These bushes do a ticking damage that some of the faster speedrunners use to speed up their kill time. Most of the slower speedruns do not use this bush, which could have made a world's difference in terms of positions on this leaderboard. Regardless, a time of 6:38 is nothing to scoff at. 10 Mu played great with well-timed guards and offset attacks. They pulled ahead of Lance by 12 seconds. So what do you do when the weapon you're using is the buff other players use for their run? What weapon do you bring to buff yourself further? The hunting horn. This heavy bowgun run is presented by Hez with no sound. It features the first and only use of sleep tech with barrel bombs. As of now, the bowguns don't have much to go on. Fortunately, they have ignition mode, which deals an impressive amount of damage. The problem is, it takes a good amount of time to recharge and makes you slower, which leads you to be more vulnerable to bigger attacks. Hez usually saved ignition mode for knockdowns to make sure all of the damage primarily went into Rey Dau's head, while sometimes going for ignition mode while at a distance. Rey Dau didn't have any super fast gap closers, they usually had a wind up to any charge or tackle animations. This made fighting Rey Dau at a distance a more safe option for weapons that were ranged. It's a solid run by Hez, finishing at 6:30. Next up is the Sword and Shield by Garana. This run features some editing which I've never seen before in speedruns, but it's hilarious. Garana goes for a wound break while Rey flies up, resulting in the hunter being launched into space. This was an interesting run because it didn't have a single perfect rush. Perfect rush has always been the Sword and Shield's bread and butter for damage, but Garana relied specifically on regular combos, charged chop, and the backstep shield dive. Charged chop being the preferred method of damage during a knockdown. This run also contains the only instance of mounting a monster not once, but twice. An extremely interesting playstyle that seemed to put it above the other Sword and Shield users at 5:51, 39 seconds ahead of the heavy bowgun. While the slower speedruns might be less appealing, what they make up for with slower time is interesting tech. Here we have Mei with a light bowgun. Using the Wyvern Blast to leave landmines for future attacks is a great touch, whether intentional or not. Mei also uses barrel bombs constantly when Rey's in a knockdown state. Mei didn't intend to use the thorn bushes, it just happened naturally, but it did amazing work for their run. 34 ticks at 15.8, that's 537 damage, which just goes to show that fighting near the bushes had the potential to completely change your run. As veteran bowgun users know, the early game is usually pretty bleak for bowguns in terms of damage. It'll be a while before we see the more crazy runs from bowguns. But that doesn't stop Mei from obtaining a 5:32, 19 seconds ahead of Sword and Shield. There were a few mistakes like getting hit by Rey and fumbling around with some of the creating and swapping of ammo. These things could have changed their ranking on the leaderboard, as there was only an 8-second difference from the weapon in front. Which is, shockingly, dual blades, a victim of circumstances as well. Dual blades go through sharpness really fast. That combined with the fact that while their wound break is good damage, sometimes it just doesn't work out in your favor. Shogiri manages to make it work and get a decent time of 5:24. They also managed to pull off tech that none of the other speedrunners used: 2 sneak attacks. Most runs will start off with the sneak attack, which is only usable when the monster is unaware of you. But mid-run, Shogiri dons the Ghillie Mantle, which conceals you from monsters temporarily and recreates the opportunity mid-fight. Shogiri goes out of their way to dodge and to raise attacks to specifically gain the power-up state that dual blades have received in Wilds. They weave in dodges, attacks, and sharpening. It's honestly as if I was watching a captivating ballet. If you're a dual blades user, it's a must watch. Hunting Horn users, rejoice. We're middle of the pack for Rey Dau from QUA. Utilizing the fact that you can set up melodies on your mount to get some of those early buffs out faster, and showcasing Hunting Horn's newest offset attack right at the beginning. It's beautiful. The newest addition to Hunting Horn are these big echo bubbles. They do a lot of damage and modify attacks as well, but QUA really pushes them to the next level. Having these bubbles near the monster are key to pumping out insane damage. Even just the application of these bubbles do pretty good. This run is just super clean, and it's an amazing presentation for what jazz enthusiasts can do with some shiny circles. It manages to get 8th place at 5:02, 22 seconds ahead of dual blades. In 7th place at 4:57, just 5 seconds ahead of Hunting Horn, we have the Insect Glaive by Pieta. The beginning of this run is just masterclass. After collecting all 3 extracts, IG users get to execute the Rising Spiral Slash, which depletes these 3 extracts. Pieta manages to get his 3 extracts instantly without any time wasted. They perform the Rising Spiral Slash and get their 3 extracts instantly again. And again. And again. And again. Pieta keeps their downtime on extracts to a minimum, which maximizes their uptime on damage for Rey Dau. Wound breaks are an easy way to get full extracts. So how many times did Pieta rely on wounds to reach full extracts? Just once. Unfortunately, Rey Dau spent a lot of time in this hunt going for their longer fly animation attacks. It happened so often that Rey Dau was no longer getting knocked out of the sky from flash pods. Pieta managed to work with what they were given and gave us a true Insect Glaive finish. Mounting over a big attack and hitting with a counter. With better RNG, Pieta easily could have overtaken the weapon in front of them. And the weapon in front starts out with a bang. Well, another offset into a huge hit. The hammer is just 3 seconds ahead of Insect Glaive, and it's presented by Peepo. This run is textbook hammer. With great uptime on bonking the monster's head, Peepo keeps Rey Dau either knocked down or exhausted. Peepo shows off great usage of the charge step both defensively and offensively, with Spinning Bludgeon and Thorny Bushes being the MVP for this run. They managed to bring Rey Dau to bushes and keep them in it for at least 80 ticks, with the tick damage being 15.5. That's 1,240 damage from bushes alone, being the first of speedrunners in this video to prioritize bush damage. Peepo also goes for the preemptive trap, which leads to a nail biter. Luckily enough, Rey Dau inches towards the trap, which has a bush right next to it. They miss a few key hits in the trap animation, but the bush finishes it, getting a solid time of 4:54. It's solid gameplay with nothing too fancy, just pure bonks as a hammer should be. Next up, inching out hammer by 6 seconds, the Greatsword by Koki. And if you were looking to see some offset attacks, then you've come to the right place. Two miracles happen in this run. The first one happens near the beginning. Koki doesn't go out of their way to use the Thorny Bush, but Rey insists. Rey goes for one of their aerial moves and flies directly over a Thorny Bush, allowing Koki to flash pod them directly into it. Unfortunately, it's short-lived. After the knockdown, Rey destroys the bush and flies away. Honestly, if you're a fan of the Greatsword or interested in learning Greatsword, check out this full run. It's a great demonstration of using the new Monster Hunter Wilds mechanic. With the new focus mode, Greatsword users will be able to change the direction for all of their charged attacks, even midway through a true charge strike, which Koki shows off. Combined with the offset attacks, the Greatsword just seems to bully Rey Dau. The second miracle of this run happens at the end. Koki goes for a preemptive trap to try and deal the final damage during the animation. It was really risky and almost failed, but that's when lightning strikes, and they're able to get the finishing blow to push Rey Dau into trapping threshold. The oddity of this run is that Koki doesn't go for a single wound break or counter. While it might be less damage than just attacking, knocking down a monster is free damage. I'd love to hear their thought process on why, or maybe some of you can give me ideas. But Koki ends this run at a 4:48. So next up is Gunlance. Yep, that's right, Gunlance. 13 seconds ahead of the Greatsword. Our Gunlance user is this person, Hebo Gunther's Vernia. Their strategy consisted of two different elements. First, and the biggest part, is the combo, burst cannon into a wyvern cannon, which Hebo pulled off flawlessly. Over and over again, he was performing these attacks where it hurt. The second is flash pods. Unlike higher ranked monsters that build up a solid resistance to flash pods, Rey Dau in the beta was low rank, meaning as long as you weren't spamming flash pods, if you hit them with the flash pod while they were in the air, it was a guaranteed knockdown. That coupled with wound knockdowns and natural knockdowns, this run showed off just how important well-timed flash pods could bring Rey Dau's rampage to a complete halt. Shockingly, this run doesn't feature any learning pods or thorn bushes, and still managed to get 4th place at 4:35. This run almost ended with a double KO. As Hebo goes to trap, he sets everything up and then takes a massive attack from Rey Dau. There's only one other instance of Hebo getting knocked down from one of Rey Dau's attacks, and that single attack might have cost him 3rd place, because the next weapon managed to beat Gunlance's time by 1 second. And that weapon is the longsword. Our longsword user is Taro Taro, and they showcase amazing use of counters and well-timed helm splitters. They consistently only used Helm Splitter in 3 different scenarios. If their monster was in a knockdown state, they managed to get a counter and got to the monster's backside. And the other scenario was Rey Dau's Wing Smash. When Rey Dau went for a Wing Smash, it caused the monster to get its wings stuck in the ground for around 6 seconds. Plenty of time to get those attacks in that might have a longer animation. Taro did not utilize the Thorn Bush at all and relied heavily on his raw damage, even dropping below green sharpness, but it was perfect timing. The second he dropped below green sharpness, the boss entered his escape animation. Easily recognizable because as soon as a monster chooses to escape to a different area, your minimap gets bigger and turns into a gray ring, much different from what the minimap looks like in combat. Taro used a luring pod at this moment, which forced another animation from Rey Dau, giving them enough time to sharpen their weapon in peace. The end of the run gets a bit sketchy when the pitfall trap doesn't activate immediately. But Rey Dau takes a tiny step back and falls into place, and we get a spectacular longsword finish. All in all, it's exactly as a longsword speedrun should be. Perfect counters and well-timed helm splitters, finishing at a 434. In second place, our charged blade user is Pacifist. Their run primarily features 2 key components: the use of the Savage Axe ability and the use of thorn bushes. So much so that they use a luring pod and proceed to kite Rey Dau to another thorn bush, since the one he was using was completely destroyed at that point. They managed to open up a wound, and that wound break caused a knockdown, and all the damage that preceded built up to another knockdown. That coupled with the flash knock at the start, Rey Dau was stuck in Knockout City. Pacifist made great use of his Savage Axe time, with close to 0 whiffs on his wide sweeping attacks. Their strategy to only fight in thorn bushes was pivotal to their success. Pacifist managed to get at least 113 ticks of bush damage. That was ticking at 16.4, totaling to a whopping 1,853 damage. 1,853 damage from bush. Not to mention the amount of flinching the bushes cause, Pacifist shows off perfectly just how important and crucial positioning was when it came to fighting Rey Dau, finishing at a 406, 28 seconds ahead of Longsword. Which brings us to the number 1 spot of the rankings. Our bow user is Nikogami at 340. This run is amazing and features only a few hiccups. Wait, did you see that? Tracers are key to doing high damage as a bow user, and it usually has a bit of animation to it, which is the hunter applying the tracer to the next arrow. You can skip most of this animation by applying the tracer and immediately aiming after doing so. These tracers need to be reapplied constantly, so shortening the animation to do so is required for getting these fast clear times. Nikogami kept their gameplay to a relatively simple formula. Most attacks were a series of charge shot into a power shot. If Rey was finishing an attack and about to start a new attack, they either stuck to this combo or only charge shots to make sure they weren't locked into any long animations. This freed them up just in case they had to dodge an attack that would hit them. When there was ample time for damage, Nikogami then shifted into using their charge shot, power volley combo, which did good damage but also had a bit more animation to it. Nikogami utilized the entire bow kit perfectly, pulling off perfect dodges to keep their bow meter healthy and to regain stamina, while maintaining as much uptime as they could on their power ammo coating. So these small hiccups. After a powerful lightning attack, a counter is available on Rey Dau's head, and as we already know, thorn bushes show up in the greener areas of the plains, and they do a constant tick damage. This tick damage causes a decent amount of flinches. And unfortunately, these two conditions lined up perfectly and created a unique problem for this run. While going for an easy counter, a thorny bush ticked and caused the boss to flinch out of his counter animation. Luckily enough, he then goes back into another lightning attack, which allowed the opportunity for another counter. There was time wasted on going into a charged focus attack and the extra attack after the flinch. This unfortunate situation paired with a missed dodge from earlier, this run had the opportunity of being closer to 330 instead of a 340. Nevertheless, it was a top-notch run that really showcases what the bow is truly capable of. It's really a bizarre thing to see Bo at the top of speedruns this early on. Bo has never really excelled in raw damage and usually used elements for their fastest kill. Much like the bowgun, they also typically needed a good amount of deco skills to be able to deal high amounts of damage. What does this mean for Bo in the future? Only time will tell. Now for that special run mentioned earlier, the heavy bowgun is back, and it absolutely smashed everyone else's rockfall record. The no rockfall heavy bowgun was a 630. This run by Reno is a 341. This run starts out with a unique tech not seen in any other run. Bomb barrels combined with a sneak attack. Reno keeps poison rolling on Rey Dau during the early part of this run and manages to get extremely lucky with positioning. Rey Dau, in an attempt to charge at Reno, flies backwards but instantly flinches on the thorns bush behind them. Rey proceeds to stand around the thorn bushes for 21 ticks of 15.5 damage. That's 325 of extra damage because Rey decided to fly backwards and flinched. With that, Reno luring pods Rey into rock territory, setting up the first trap, but it whiffs, and the bomb barrels do 0 damage. On to trap number 2, the star of the run. Reno instantly goes for the sleep, and after Rey's put to sleep, they shoot the falling rocks. Sleep animation and the damage from the falling rocks line up perfectly for a total of 1,548 damage. After 2 more rock falls, Reno lays barrels down along with a trap, and the rest is history. There was plenty of room for improvements in most of these runs, and that's to be expected. The beta was only a limited time event, and players had to work with what they had. The armor provided didn't do much to change any of the gameplay. I know that the Monster Hunter community can be split at times when it comes to speedruns. While they're flashy and fun to watch, some people think that the speedrun culture is breeding a toxic player base inside the community. While that might be true, for me personally, I like to view speedruns as a learning opportunity. What works against a monster, what tech is easy to perform in a regular hunt, and what combos people are using to deal high damage. A big shout out to all the speedrunners. Each one of their channels will be listed below, as well as the website that this was listed on. And how can I forget? Shout out to you for watching up till this point. Feel free to subscribe for more Monster Hunter content in the future. I also have a Patreon if you're interested in supporting the channel. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you later.